It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Should we tweak the atmosphere to counteract global warming? Question mark. That headline is from newscientist.com. Question, does New Scientist mean actually tweak or trash? Look up, because the latter has long since been carried out. Next, playing God with the atmosphere. That's the title of a new article from theatlantic.com. The Atlantic report then states, quote, many climate experts see geoengineering as a last resort. Really? A last resort that has been raging in our skies for decades, a last resort that has been deployed for over 75 years, a last resort that has been and is the covert weapon of the controllers, a weapon with which they can bring populations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault. And let's add this. New climate study shows cloud cover is easier to affect than previously thought. That's from phys.org. What a surprise. The report continues. A new analysis of cloud measurements combined with global satellite measurements reveals that even aerosol particles as small as 25 to 30 nanometers may contribute to cloud formation. There it is again. Aerosols could, may, might contribute to cloud formation, and we need a panel of so-called scientists to tell us that? Just look up. Our filth-filled aerosol cloud and haze-covered skies are shockingly apparent to any that don't have their eyes wide shut. The PHYS report continues. Smaller aerosols are activated into cloud droplets. Hence, the climate impact of small aerosols may be underestimated. In simple terms, the report states the more water there is, the easier it can be condensed and the smaller the seed needs to be. Wait, what part are they neglecting to even mention? The smaller the particle, the more bioavailable and toxic it is to all life. But the so-called climate science community doesn't want to bore you with details like that, do they? And there's that nagging detail of the now decimated ozone layer, an extremely near-term existential threat in and of itself. Climate intervention operations and the radio frequency microwave transmissions they involve are the overall greatest core causal factor of ozone destruction. New from chemistryworld.com, this. Warning that solar geoengineering could cause unexpected regional heating. Another example of could, may, might. Except there is no ambiguity in this equation. Solar radiation management is causing exactly what the chemistryworld.com headline just stated. The report continues. A recent modeling study has raised new concerns about the unpredictability of solar geoengineering, questioning our ability to reliably manage the outcomes of this approach in reducing the impacts of climate change. They continue. Some detrimental effects of this injection, aka solar radiation management, are of a similar magnitude than those from climate change itself. Consider the chemistryworld.com statement I just cited. Some detrimental effects of this injection are of a similar magnitude to those from climate change itself. Translation: solar radiation management operations cause the very malady they claim to mitigate. Why isn't that any surprise? This is exactly the conclusion that geoengineeringwatch.org has stated on the record for the entire 15 years of our existence. And, for the record, there's nothing benevolent about climate engineering anything. It is, and has always been, a covert weapon of war on many levels. The Chemistry World report then states, quote, the study's authors suggest that using materials like alumina, aka aluminum, could alleviate some of the side effects. Wow, what a great idea. Like using lead in pipes. How'd that work out? The answer to that question depends on one's particular perspective, doesn't it? From the point of view of those in power, a sicker and dumber population is easier to control. That's absolutely true. In the case of bioavailable aluminum, it is toxic to all life forms, period. No exceptions. Anything they spray in the sky is obviously going to rain down to the surface where we all get to inhale it and absorb it in our food, water, everything. And about the lead pipe example, In this case, eventually the curtain is pulled back. Here's a quick new footnote headline on that point. This is just a side note. An example from enews.net. White House sends $3 billion to states for lead pipes. The Biden administration announced $3 billion in federal funding to help all 50 states remove lead pipes from their drinking water systems. Well then, that should fix everything, right? Not so much. Damage done as planned. And don't look up or test your rain for aluminum along with a long and growing list of other toxic elements, lest you find what most don't want to know. And try not to breathe, eat, or drink. All is now ubiquitously contaminated. And that's not speculation, theory, or conjecture. It's lab test proven fact. Next, more red flags being raised about climate engineering from the so-called climate science community. Question, why has it taken them over 75 years to start telling the truth? From technologytimes.pk, study raises concerns about solar geoengineering's unpredictability. The recent study, which modeled the regional effects of injecting aerosols into the stratosphere, and for the record, the vast majority of spraying is in the troposphere, which carries even more consequences. The determination utilized a comprehensive global aerosol chemistry climate model. The findings unveiled startling revelations indicating that the adverse effects of such interventions could rival those of climate change itself, as we were just told from another source, correct? The Technology Times report continues. These effects include significant warming in the upper atmosphere above the tropics, alterations in large-scale weather patterns, intensified surface warming in polar regions, and modifications in regional precipitation patterns over land. Question: exactly like everything that's occurring in real time right now? Geoengineeringwatch.org was sent a letter this week from an individual that very confidently stated that they knew climate engineering wasn't happening because they had a family member that was a pilot who told them so. Well, you can imagine my relief. Nothing to worry about in our skies after all. Never mind the countless clips of film footage that says otherwise. Never mind the up-close photos of retrofit nozzles mounted on wing pylons and aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make this look like, quote, condensation. Never mind the hundreds of lab tests from around the world, both atmospheric and surface, confirming climate engineering elements in our rain and in our air column. Never mind the historical congressional and presidential documents posted at geoengineeringwatch.org, some nearly 1,000 pages long that fully outline the scope and scale of the operations in our skies going back decades with global cooperation. Never mind the admission of these programs by top-ranking U.S. military officers featured in the geoengineeringwatch.org documentary, The Dimming, which can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Never mind the former state and federal scientists that are sounding the alarm about geoengineering operations, again, also featured in the geoengineeringwatch.org documentary, The Dimming. Never mind the constant filth-filled grid-patterned skies, completely derailed weather and climate patterns all over the world, planes zigzagging across our skies in non-commercial routes, turning dispersions on and off, the collapsing ozone layer, the list goes on and on. But never mind all of it, because some sound asleep at the wheel individual says none of it's happening because their pilot family member says it isn't so. Just another day in the planetary asylum. And there's this footnote. The same self-proclaimed alt-media truth-tellers that deny climate engineering and claim it's all just jet exhaust now also seem to be claiming that patented atmospheric frequency transmission technologies are also not actually happening. Question, are these self-proclaimed truth-tellers working both sides of the fence? You decide. Back to our skies and the damage being done to the climate system, as well as us and the entire web of life, no exceptions. Is this next headline from Fortune.com a harbinger of climate engineering, quote, unpredictability? Texas extreme weather is just getting started, report warns. Again, that new headline from Fortune.com. And this from the UK Guardian. Mega drought forces end to sugarcane farming in parched Texas borderland. And let's add this, in the same state at the same time. New from CBS News. Floods swamping southeast Texas. More rain expected with totals nearing historic levels. Exactly as geoengineeringwatch.org has stated on the record for a decade and a half, devastating droughts and destructive deluges are the hallmarks of climate intervention operations. Question, are states and or countries punished for a lack of compliance and obedience to the dictates of empire? Are currency wars now a part of the push and pull for power on a rapidly dying planet? Are currency wars connected to climate engineering? Stay with me for the rundown on this question in a moment, just after I cover the new warning of coming empty food shelves. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the End of the World as We Know It broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness is the only way forward in this fight. We must reach a critical mass by starting a conversation on the climate engineering issue that leads people to a credible source of data. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. Start a conversation on climate engineering with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials, including our shirts and hoodies and printed materials available on our homepage. If we can fully expose weather warfare, so many other truths will be forced to the full light of day with it. From conflicts to climate engineering, the controllers work all sides of the equation. The same cancerous core of global control also controls the narrative. Of course this is the case. It can't possibly be otherwise. U.S. matrix media is the epitome of money printer-controlled propaganda. And though all matrix media sources are weapons of mass deception and distraction, Fox News is the pinnacle of power structure-controlled propaganda. So, if you're feeding for your information from the matrix media trough and you think you know the truth, historically or present, think again. Objective investigation isn't just an option, it's our absolute obligation. From Yahoo News, farmers warn food aisles will soon be empty because of crushing conditions. The report says we are not in a good position. That's a quote from the farmers. From the report, the United Kingdom is facing dire food shortages, forcing prices to skyrocket, and experts predict the story is only just beginning. The Yahoo News summary continues with this. According to a recent report by The Guardian, extreme weather is wreaking havoc on crops across the region. English farmers, however, aren't alone. People are struggling to grow crops worldwide because of extreme weather. According to an ABC News report, the strain on the agriculture industry will likely continue to cause food prices to soar. For the record, this is just the beginning, as the report from Yahoo News stated. Over 36 countries are already collapsing into chaos. Empty food shelves are core to that equation. So, wow, no food on the shelves even in first world nations. That doesn't sound good, does it? But perhaps we can drink our weather warfare woes away with a good bottle of wine. Or maybe not. New from Euronews.com, worst wine harvest in 62 years blamed on extreme weather and climate change. And for the record, the worst wine harvest in 62 years means worst ever. The controllers of the matrix almost always toss in some long past date to create the impression that such a catastrophe has happened before when it hasn't. The International Organization of Vine and Wine, that's the OIV, says the drink hit its lowest level since 1962. This intergovernmental organization has 50 member states representing 75% of the world's vineyard area. Experts blame, quote, extreme environmental conditions, including droughts and fires, that have been driving the downward trend in production. What they don't cite is the soil's contamination and the ozone layer deterioration. Those are the taboo subjects, not allowed. Near the end of this report, they confirmed what I stated at the beginning. Quote, global wine production reached a historic low in 2023. Historic low, aka worst ever. And about the bugs, the kind that we can't live without, literally. From cleantechnica.com, quote, imminent insect demise means global food web is on verge of collapse. The newest report from the World Entomology Body, that's the WEB, is absolutely frightening, this report states. The most recent annual assessment available of insect health indicates that loss of whole insect communities is imminent, which will have disastrous effects for the global food web. The end of human ability to grow mass food stock could cause social upheavals. Again, no, not could, not may, not might. When food shelves empty out, the Mad Max version of social collapse is a given. If a multi-layered nuclear nightmare hasn't taken us out first. Now, currency wars and climate engineering, aka weather warfare. Is there a connection? Follow me through this sequence of reports. First, from the other side of the world, more of the same on the issue of climate mayhem. From weather.com, massive hailstones wreck cars and buildings in China. Think chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding. Next, from the South China Morning Post, tornado kills 5 in flood-hit southern Chinese city. The report says a strong tornado hit China's southern megacity of Guangzhou on Saturday afternoon, killing 5 people and injuring 33 as severe rain and hailstorms battered the Guangdong province capital. Authorities said the tornado was of level 3 intensity. Anyone hear about a Cat 3 Chinese tornado from the climate engineering cover-up actors at the Weather Channel? Didn't think so. From the dailygazette.com, large hail damages crops in China. Yes, agricultural regions are being hit with every imaginable form of climate catastrophe. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. From reliefweb.com, following the heavy rainfall that has been affecting southeastern Iran, causing floods and rivers to overflow, the number of casualties and damage is increasing. And for the record, Iran has long since repeatedly stated on the record that NATO countries were cutting off their rain or augmenting it in cases such as the current flooding. But both scenarios are crushing crops. From Euronews.com, why was Russia caught off guard by huge floods this month? ? From SkyNews.com, raging floods hit Saudi Arabia now. And of course, most are well aware of the devastating deluges that recently hit Dubai. With all that I just covered in mind, from Bloomberg, backlash against weaponized dollar is growing across the world. And keep in mind, all these events are connected. They're inseparable. The report says, use of the dollar as a geopolitical tool pushing world leaders to avoid it. The currency's centrality to the global payment system allows America to wield unique influence over the economic destiny of other nations. Question, is weaponized weather being used for the same exact purpose? For those that may not know, the dollar was installed as the global reserve currency by the Bretton Woods Agreement near the end of World War II. Question, did other nations around the world agree to this because they were told behind closed doors that the U.S. now possessed nuclear bombs? And as the world found out a year later, the U.S. was willing to use these new weapons of mass destruction on innocent civilian populations, aka Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Remember the statement I just covered from the Bloomberg report that the U.S. dollar, quote, centrality to the global payment system allows America to wield unique influence over the economic destiny of other nations. So, to those that thought nations around the world send us their resources just because they love us so much, while they themselves are starving to death, literally, time to wake up. Global extortion, often at gunpoint, that's how the empire is sustained. Let's add this question. Have and do covert global climate engineering operations provide the U.S. yet another means of total hegemonic control over other nations? Covert weather warfare, a weapon with which by far the largest military in the world can bring populations and countries to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they were under assault from the skies above? Just blame it on nature. And for the record, not surprisingly, the U.S. military juggernaut is by far the most funded military on the planet, thanks to the U.S. dollar being forced as the global reserve currency. Again, at the point of a gun, in many cases, the U.S. military spends more than the next 9 biggest militaries combined. Think about that. And again, for the record, leaders of other nations have gone on the record, in the case, as I stated earlier, of Iran, and also Venezuela, stating that the U.S. environmental weapons of mass destruction were wreaking havoc on their countries and their crops. Back to the covert weapon of currency control that the BRICS countries, understandably, have had enough of. Here's the latest on what is perhaps blowback from the UAE for the devastating deluge that recently took place in Dubai and China, etc. From CoinMarketCap.com, BRICS make $260 billion trade transaction using local currencies. From that report, BRICS nations, including Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, are pushing even harder to ditch the US dollar in global trade. Next, this from bittimes.com. BRICS make huge announcement about launching new currency. BRICS is working on the formation of a new currency in the global markets to challenge the US dollar's supremacy. The alliance aims to uproot the US dollar from the world's reserve and replace it with the new BRICS currency. Yes, the empire is collapsing, but biosphere collapse will be the bottom line for all of us, for all countries, for all people, everywhere. And back to the unfolding biosphere collapse, with climate engineering further fueling the process. From BBC, ozone hole, why Antarctic wildlife is being, quote, sunburnt. The report says, for Antarctic wildlife, exposure to the sun's damaging rays has increased in recent years, scientists say. A major cause of ozone loss is believed to be the amount of smoke from unprecedented Australian wildfires, the report says, which were fueled by climate change, they say. Can't deny that. We've been horrible stewards of the planet. Geoengineering.org has never denied that. But what massive elephant in this equation is the entire so-called climate science community denying, criminal denial. The report continues, there's also evidence that krill, the small and hugely abundant marine creatures, or at least formerly hugely abundant, that are the foundation of the Antarctic food chain, are moving deeper into the ocean to avoid UV rays, which could affect the whales, seals, penguins, and other seabirds that feed on them. How could it be could? How could, may, might be a part of this equation? The climate science community never tells the truth. They say we also know that phytoplankton that the krill feed on will have to make sunscreens in order to avoid damage. Are they going to put up umbrellas? What does this even mean? Are they going to be able to adapt at that pace? No, they can't. They aren't, and that's why the bottom of the food chain is collapsing all over the world. Phytoplankton. They continue, there are still a number of factors that are delaying ozone recovery, including wildfires and major volcanic eruptions. These release particles that fuel the ozone-eating reactions that have already done so much damage. They then say this, some proposed climate cooling experiments, so-called geoengineering, propose, quote, making clouds by releasing particles into the upper atmosphere. The BBC report then says that would also deplete ozone, so it's a bad idea, quote unquote from BBC. So stop and consider that last statement that falls short of an actual admission, because to do so for this scientist and this report would be likely much worse than just a bad career decision. Never forget that if populations could be fully awakened to the climate engineering, weather warfare assault, awakened to what has been done to them without their knowledge or consent, awakened to the fact that our collective fate may already be sealed because of these operations, will they take to the streets with their proverbial pitchforks and torches to hold legally and morally accountable anyone and everyone that actively or passively took part in the climate engineering crimes or in the systematic cover-up of these crimes? We'll likely soon find out, as the elephant in the sky is becoming all but impossible to hide. Thus, due to all that I just stated, the matrix manipulators will do everything in their power to deny climate engineering operations till the final moment. We must beat them to the intersection. More insanity. New from MIT Technology Review, why new ethanol aviation fuel tax subsidies aren't a clear climate win. Report says ethanol makers who use sustainably produced corn can now qualify for big federal tax credits. Here we have the so-called experts, and they say they've just now figured this out, that using our last stocks of food to make jet fuel, perhaps much of it for climate engineering jet aircraft that are destroying the ozone layer, disrupting the rain cycles, contaminating the entire planet, and thus curtailing the very potential food supplies that they're turning into jet fuel. Does any of this seem in any way sane to you? And the best conclusion that MIT so-called experts can come up with is that it isn't a clear climate win? Really? And the criminal cabal masquerading as the U.S. government, both parties, all the same, are funding the entire fiasco? How many Americans believe, even now, that if they could just get their particular political clown elected, everything would turn out fine? Good luck with that. And even if we make it to the elections without our current reality capsizing. And keep in mind, many factors are already past the breaking point. On any given day, the controllers could play much bigger cards, aka crash the current reality altogether. Bottom line, climate engineering, toxic temperature whiplash scenarios, and toxic fallout are wreaking havoc on what is yet left of the web of life that's struggling to survive. The so-called climate science community are absolutely not telling us the truth. First, about the global climate engineering reality. Second, about how dire and immediate the climate collapse actually is. Thus, the so-called climate scientists belong in one of two categories. Either they're criminally ignorant of the very field of study in which we are told they're experts, or they're lying. Take your pick. The vast majority of these individuals exist in a kind of programmed bubble of non-reality. Geoengineeringwatch.org needs all the help we can get with sending a link to the Dimming documentary to every single so-called climate scientist, every single environmental organization, so-called elected officials, farm groups, ag groups, the list goes on and on. Perhaps Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, would be a good start, and ask him about my meeting with him 10 years ago in his office at the Capitol, and he has done absolutely nothing after I presented data to him for about 30 minutes, which he could not dispute, nor could his top aide who was with him at the time. Ask Mr. Newsom about that. And if you send out the link to the Dimming, to those you send it to, ask them why they are hiding from and denying the shockingly obvious climate engineering elephant in the sky. Earlier this year from weather.com, disasters displaced nearly 2.5 million people in the U.S. in 23. That's just the beginning. From BBC, Sudan civil war, the children living between starvation and death in Darfur. Again, about 36 plus nations are circling the drain right now. Haiti's in that list, but there are many, many more. From Scientific American, climate disasters, surprising cascading effects. I've spoken about this on so many broadcasts, cascading collapse. The report says climate disasters cause rippling effects far beyond the initial event. Really? Who would have thought that an inconceivably complex web of life would have a cascading collapse effect when links in that chain of life begin to break? A process that is already in advanced stages. Does it really take a team of so-called scientists to determine that when the insects die, the bats and birds will die, and that when they die, other interdependent species will die, etc., etc.? That's just one example. The dominoes will continue to fall and accelerate. But don't worry, there's still an endless parade of scripted political theater to keep us all occupied until the moment of impact. And if that starts to get monotonous, there's the endless list of scheduled sports events that you can watch while eating your processed food pizza from Domino's that's now even cheaper than it was decades ago. The manipulators of the Matrix want to be sure that the inmates of the planetary asylum are fully entertained and with full bellies. Bread and circus till the brutal, bitter end, which draws near. On that note about our dying forests, without which we die, from the UK Guardian, repeated periods of heat and drought causing some trees to die off. Let's correct that for the record. It's not just some trees. The entire Amazon is in a state of decline. It's now become a carbon source instead of a carbon sink. Same is true with boreal forest. This UK Guardian report then states, climate change is causing apparently healthy trees to die after periods of heat and drought. Many may not die immediately, but repeated periods of hot weather seem to increase the vulnerability of some species more than others. Again, for the record, it isn't just climate havoc conditions just described. It's also the toxic fallout, which impacts some species more than others and some soils more than others, depending on historical pH values. It's also the ozone layer, the intense UV radiation. There's so much more to this equation. They try to simplify it as if it's just nature behaving badly. This is criminal reporting. More climate engineering cover-up from ABC News. Study says California 2023 snow rescue from mega drought was, quote, freak event. They say last year's snow deluge in California, which quickly erased a 2-decade-long mega drought, was essentially a once-in-a-lifetime rescue from above. What's that mean? Rescue from above. A new study has found, is this toxic rain helping our trees? No. Every fir tree in western forest is in some state of decline or death. Some species, it's less visible. Gray pines are one. But the forest is in sharp decline. In fact, the most recent study of fir trees in western forests, as I've cited before in this broadcast, was titled Firmageddon. I think that title is clear. Next from AccuWeather.com. Potent May storm to drench Pacific Northwest dump snow on Sierra Nevada. Most winter storms are done for the season, but a late running system will dump big rain on the coastal Northwest and up to a couple feet of snow on the Sierra Nevada. Let's stop there. This is a continuation of the manipulation of heavily seeded moisture flows into the Pacific Northwest. Chemical ice-nucleated cloud seeding creates a temporary and toxic surface cool-down, keeping vast swaths of the western U.S. cooler than they would otherwise be. This pattern of the last 2 years was a change from the former climate engineering conveyor of preference for the weather makers. I'll get to that in a moment. First, another from AccuWeather. Warmth, chill, and rain to eye northeast for first few days of May. They say rain will create trouble for outdoor plans across the Northeast during the weekend as warm and cool air collide over the region. Yes, warm and cool air colliding, but not from natural climatic conditions as the weather forecasters, aka scheduled weather script readers, would have you believe. The cold air masses are the result of patented processes of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations. Cold surface layer, not indicative of overall atmospheric conditions. Welcome to weather and temperature whiplash scenarios. So about the decade and a half before the last 2 years, a very different process was being utilized by the weather terrorists. Geoengineeringwatch.org has covered this process in great depth and detail. Here's one report title, Frying the West to Cool the East. Include geoengineeringwatch.org in that title in your search, and you should find some of our reports on this subject. Here's the former process. The facilitation of an ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome off the Pacific Northwest coast. The upper-level winds, and thus atmospheric moisture, spin clockwise around a northern hemisphere high-pressure dome. It acts like an atmospheric pulley. The climate engineers were spinning Pacific moisture up and around the west coast of the U.S., most specifically around California. This process blocked moisture from the formerly Golden State, creating the worst drought in at least 1,200 years, according to paleo data. The diverted moisture was spun around the ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome, chemically nucleated the whole way, and then dropped back down into the eastern half of the U.S., and often labeled with the title polar vortex, which until recently kept the eastern half of the U.S. consistently cooler, often with temperature whiplash events from chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding. And this process also further fueled a colliding air mass scenario in the eastern U.S., which destabilizes the atmosphere and further facilitates cyclonic rotations, aka tornadoes. Back to the current cool-down conveyor. Presently, the climate engineers are manipulating large, unorganized moisture zonally straight into the western U.S., scattering the moisture with RF microwave transmissions and seeding with chemical ice nucleation elements. Again, this creates a cold, dense layer of air that settles to the surface. So while much of the world is hurtling toward total meltdown, Americans are kept confused and divided as to the true state of the planet. So, backtracking, this new report, an acknowledgement of past events that I just described, the ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes off the Pacific Northwest coast. From phys.org, atmospheric teleconnections, that's in quotes. What do they mean by that? Sustain warm blobs in the northeast Pacific Ocean, report says, spawned by a long-lasting ridge of high pressure that formed over the Gulf of Alaska. While some details, they say, are uncertain, it is known that these high-pressure systems maintained the warm blobs while simultaneously causing abnormal cold temperatures over North America during the colder season, just as I described a moment ago. This is everything Geoengineeringwatch.org has warned about for a decade and a half. It's starting to come to light. An ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat dome over the eastern Pacific, causing the, quote, warm blob of Pacific Ocean temperatures. With all this bad news on the West Coast, let's head to Florida for some fun in the surf and sand, or should I say in the superheated dying seas and the filth-filled aerosol-sprayed skies. From PBS Florida, sargassum buries beaches and threatens tourism. Deep piles of sargassum, a yellow brand seaweed normally stuck out in the tropical Atlantic, are finding a way to foul many southeastern Florida beaches and Caribbean islands. In 2023, a swath stretched some 5,000 miles long, 300 miles wide, extending from West Africa to the Gulf of Mexico. Think about that. It weighed in at some 13 million tons, it's estimated. Yes, hydrogen sulfide emitting sargassum seaweed, another harbinger of Earth's dying ocean. Again, There's only one. It's all connected. One ocean. And let's not forget the smelly dead fish in Florida, the flesh-eating bacteria along the Gulf Coast, and the dead coral reefs. Does all that make you want to take the next Carnival cruise ship to the nearest Caribbean Club Med? Almost forgot. One more footnote on Florida from Gizmodo.com. Florida dolphin dies of bird flu as alarm grows over species spread. Florida scientists have reported the first known and fatal case of highly pathogenic H5N1 avian influenza in a bottlenose dolphin. Bird flu isn't just lurking inside cows. New research shows Florida scientists have reported the first known case of highly pathogenic H5N1 in a common bottlenose dolphin. It's the latest indication that these flu strains can potentially infect a wide variety of mammals. Wonder where they're all coming from. Those 400 plus level 4 biolabs around the world couldn't have anything to do with this, could they? How's the ocean doing on the other side of the world? From Manga Bay, India, Indian Ocean headed for a near permanent state of marine heat wave. Let's call it what it is. As I've cited many times in this broadcast, we are hurtling toward what is known as Canfield Ocean. Look that one up. Lifeless, superheated, stratified, oxygenless, global dead zone in the seas. Next, a new breaking report on the Great Barrier Reef, which truly hits home for me as I've seen this wonder of the world firsthand on 2 exploratory expedition trips before the devastation of today. I was given the privilege of diving on the Great Barrier Reef during the days and the nights, both equally spectacular. Then, before the collapse, from the UK Guardian, Great Barrier Reef's worst bleaching leaves giant coral graveyard. It looks as if it has been carpet bombed. That's the headline. From Vox.com, the end of coral reefs as we know them. Years ago, scientists made a devastating prediction about the ocean. Now it's unfolding. Now enter the disaster capitalists, always ready to pick the meat off the bones of a rapidly dying planet. From Bloomberg.com, private equity sees the coral crisis as an investment opportunity. Whatever their angle, it's clearly moronic. On our current course, no one gets out alive. No one. More heat being further fueled by decades of geoengineering, new from CBS News. Summer heat hits Asia early, killing dozens as one expert calls it the, quote, most extreme event in climate history. Several parts of India recorded maximum temperatures over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, one location up to 114.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's do some math on that. If the location in India that just had an April temperature of 114.8 degrees Fahrenheit had a humidity, for example, of 40%, the heat index temperature, aka the feels-like temperature, would be over 150 degrees. For all those in the chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding regions of the U.S., such astounding heat wave index temperatures don't seem possible in April. No less, and all of this occurring as locations like Denver, Colorado, continues to whiplash back and forth between 80-degree temperatures and chemical so-called snow, falling at far above freezing temperatures, but nobody notices anymore. They don't seem to consider the laws of physics haven't changed, so something else has. This is highly toxic frozen material, and the baseball-size hail now that accompanies almost every convective storm across central portions of the U.S. Don't people wonder what's wrong? From AP News, Philippine students are told to stay home as Southeast Asia swelters in prolonged heat wave. From phys.org, April temperatures in Bangladesh hottest on record. From CNN, hundreds of thousands of fish die off as heat wave roasts Southeast Asia. From MacauNews.org, the Asian heat wave is shattering meteorological records. Question: are the various puzzle pieces beginning to form a clearer picture? The countries with the largest and best-funded military machines, with the U.S. at the top of that list, continue to carry out temporary and toxic cool-downs, but not without consequence. Drought, deluge, flash freeze, extreme hail. What we are being warned about on coming hurricanes as well. The worst season ever, we're told. That's what the schedule is. I mean the prediction. Same thing. The list goes on. Buckle up, because we're in for a ride. All of us. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 456. May 4th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Hour can be found on the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. Geoengineering Watch wishes to express our deepest gratitude to those that have helped us to expand our reach and thus our voice in this desperate last-hour effort to sound the alarm. If you're on our email list, please put us on your email contact book so that our mailouts don't go to the spam files. Please help us to share the groundbreaking documentary, The Dimming, which fully exposes the climate engineering atrocities, now with well over 10 million views and counting. Thanks to all those that have helped us get this film into circulation. The best way to share is by circulating the direct link to The Dimming by email directly from the homepage of Geoengineeringwatch.org. Sharing directly helps us to overcome social media censorship. When viewing our YouTube of The Dimming or Global Alert News or any other Geoengineering Watch video on YouTube, please subscribe, share, and comment, all of which helps us to circulate critically important data to a much wider audience. About reaching those that still aren't looking up and seeing the elephant in the sky, here's one way. By starting a conversation with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials which can be found on our homepage. Our only goal, to provide activists what they need to move this fight forward as fast as possible. Extremely high-quality printed materials with shocking images. We now have Geoengineering Watch hoodies to go with our Geoengineering Watch shirts. Photos of both are on our homepage. We have scannable business cards and bumper stickers, all effective tools to help strike up a conversation on the climate engineering issue. Reaching a critical mass of awareness, can't stress this enough, on the climate engineering issue is the great imperative. It is the only way forward in this fight. As we awaken our military brothers and sisters to what they are participating in, i.e. their own demise and ours, and we hope, we pray that they stand down. Stop participating in your own demise. Stop believing that you're doing something for the greater good, which could not be further from the truth. Of course, your commanding officers and those who command them are going to tell you that. Please research for yourself. Find out what you're participating in, and remember your oath to protect your countrymen from all threats, foreign and domestic. If you're willing to share a picture of yourself with a Geoengineering Watch t-shirt or hoodie, perhaps at a local mall, somewhere crowded, please send your photo to us so that we can post it as part of our activist compilation, which is now part of our materials page. The images encourage others to make their voices heard in this desperate battle to sound the alarm. Again, as always, to those who are steadfastly committed to this must-win fight for everything that we hold dear, I want to express my deepest and most profound gratitude. Only our collective efforts can make a difference at this late hour. Moving on, about the polar regions. Global sea surface temperatures continue to soar ever further into completely uncharted territory. Again, to put this into perspective, every single day for over a year has been a record sea surface temperature. Consider that. And for all those who are claiming and have claimed for 15 years that we're spiraling into an ice age while the planet continues to superheat, ask them to explain themselves. Yes, we all love to hate Al Gore. He's a hypocrite, part of the problem, but that doesn't mean you take the opposite position of anything that he's ever said or any other environmental group. I don't hold any of them in regard, none. But we still are obligated to look at facts and reason. The planet's in meltdown, and climate engineering is further fueling the fire. And I don't want anybody to believe me. People ask me, I don't know who to believe, you or some Ice Age person. Don't believe anybody. Please believe your own eyes. Please search online for film footage of the polar regions. And if you don't believe your own eyes, there's nothing I or anybody else can tell you. Film footage is absolutely inarguable, and the best film to watch is Chasing Ice. It's 10 years old. It's way worse now. Non-political. Only film footage that is shocking to the marrow. Chasing Ice, you can find it online. So about the Arctic sea ice volume, record low right now. Not the extent, the volume, the mass, which is all that matters. So ask yourself this question: how can the volume be the lowest on record, or the mass, and the extent, the surface area, not be record? Because they are now considering any part of the Arctic Ocean that's 15% slush or more to be sea ice. Isn't that still 85% ocean? Of course it is. For those that don't understand it and have not done the research, if we lose the polar ice, we lose the planet. Climate engineering, aka weather warfare, is further fueling all of it. And those that parrot the narrative that, well, we've had a planet without polar ice before and life still existed, that was changes that took place over unimaginably long spans of time. You can't just flick the switch in a geologic blink of an eye and expect to live through it. Won't happen. Massive methane deposits, tundra and seafloor, will then release into the atmosphere, cover the planet like a layer of glass. It's already happening. If it happens on the scale that is about to happen, climate engineering again making it worse, it's game over. And consider at what point, if we look at all of these signs like a planetary check engine light, if you're driving down the freeway and your check engine immediate light begins to flash, do you just keep driving across country hoping it's okay? That's not rational, is it? If the temperature gauges are off the scale and there's no oil pressure and there's smoke coming out from under the hood, you just keep driving? Some would, I'm sorry to say. Many are. From USA Today, California's weather hasn't been kind to Mount Shasta's glaciers. Can they survive? Question mark. This report hits close to home for me because Mount Shasta is a beacon in my northern skyline, very visible out the back of my wilderness home. The report says the long-term outlook for Mount Shasta's glaciers is not good, considering the trend toward a warmer climate and less precipitation. And the recent snowmageddons didn't help anything at all either, to put the record straight. They say a study of glaciers in the nearby Trinity Alps, which are west of Mount Shasta in the Klamath Mountains, states that the glaciers from the 1980s to 2013 had catastrophic decline in their size. That's the word they use, catastrophic. The report then states the glaciers shrank more than 80% during that time, and some of them even disappeared. Yes, I've seen this firsthand on Mount Shasta. I solo summited Shasta several years ago. The glacier at the top of Avalanche Gulch, which was my route, looked bad even then. So while the former long-term ice is melting in so many locations around the world, including the polar regions, there's this headline to consider from Le In Mongolia, a murderous winter decimates nomadic herds. What's that all about? It's an ongoing story. I covered it in previous broadcast. Chemical ice nucleation creates a frozen surface that prevents these animals from scratching their way through it and feeding. Same is happening to the caribou herds in the north. Millions of animals are estimated to have died in Mongolia this winter because of the extreme chemical ice nucleation operations. Same thing in the polar regions. This is what weather warfare is all about. No concern for the consequences, no concern for the decimation of the web of life, no concern for the complete contamination of the entire biosphere every breath we take. Those in power don't concern themselves with such things. When will that be apparent? When will people stop waving their flags supporting this entire matrix system of total destruction? When? What will it take to wake people up to the fact that the planetary governing system, those who control it, those who print the money, are not benevolent in any way, shape, or form, and that all of us are not just expendable to them, but a rapidly increasing liability? When will that become clear? From sciencenews.org, will stashing more CO2 in the ocean help slow climate change? Question mark. What an incredibly, ridiculously absurd question. The oceans are already acidifying, so let's force them to acidify further by absorbing even more CO2. They say seaweed farming, iron fertilization, and direct capture are among the strategies being tested. The human race has lost its collective mind, and those who think that any of these so-called solutions are anything other than smoke, mirrors, and complete science idiocy needs to wake up. There's never enough time to cover the breaking reports that are unfolding from the front lines of global climate and biosphere collapse, but I'll do my best. I'm going to cite a number of headlines in succession. You can look them up to learn more. From BBC, Mali heat wave. Ice becomes a hot commodity as temperatures soar. From Bloomberg, Thai power demand hits record as extreme heat prompts warnings. From NBC News, major cities in Mexico are running out of water as extreme heat continues. From weather.com, again, Bangladesh is in the grips of its longest heat wave in 75 years, aka the longest in recorded history since record keeping began. The heat wave has reached a 29th day, the longest, again, since the government started keeping records in 1948. From Vox.com, we could be heading into the hottest summer of our lives. I think that's completely inevitable at this point. Climate engineering making it all worse, not better. Again, whatever you want to consider as causing the heat on our planet, you can pretend that somebody's up there turning up a thermostat. I don't care what you pretend, but there's no ignoring climate engineering, no ignoring the rest of the damage we've done to the planet, and no ignoring the fact that it's heating exponentially and quickly. It's not a natural cycle. It's no more natural than if you run somebody over in a crosswalk and claim they died of a heart attack. You wouldn't make that argument in court, would you? From Splinter.com, the impossible heat wave era is upon us. From the LA Times, climate change supercharged a heat dome. I take issue with that headline. I've already cited it in this broadcast. The ionosphere heater-induced heat domes, part of the arsenal of the climate engineers. They say intensifying 2021 fire season. They're admitting to that part now. Study finds. Again, I went over this earlier, so let's add to that from Globe and Mail. Preparing for wildfire season is a year-round endeavor in Western Canada. It is now, for some of the reasons already cited. Please search the Engineering Wildfire section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. You will not like what you learn. From CBC Canada, how BC is mobilizing for, quote, challenging wildfire season. They're already telling us what the schedule is going to be. From CBS, Canada at risk of another catastrophic wildfire season. It's not just Canada, is it? Let's stand back and take a stark look at the wider horizon. From Medium.com, the human ecology of overshoot, why a major population correction is inevitable. Homo sapiens have evolved to reproduce exponentially, to recover from depopulation events, aka plague, disaster, etc., and to expand geographically as a competitive displacement strategy. Thus, to consume all available resources within environmental productivity limits, aka carrying capacity. For most of humanity's evolutionary history over the last 50,000 to 75,000 years, such expansionist tendencies have been countered by negative feedback, aka overshoot and collapse. However, the scientific revolution and the use of carbon fuels reduced many forms of negative feedback, again, starvation, scarcity, induced conflict, etc., enabling humans to realize their full potential for exponential growth. Herein lies the core problem. The human enterprise is a dissipative structure, aka a complex, adaptive, dissipative, but non-evolvable system or structure, as are supercells or whirlwinds, which form, expand until the energy runs out, and then dissipate. In the case of the human race, it can grow and maintain itself only by consuming and dissipating available energy and resources extracted from its host, Earth. Technology has only temporarily suspended the usual limits. So again, humanity, an industrialized, militarized, so-called civilization, can grow and maintain itself only by consuming and dissipating available energy and resources extracted from its host system, the ecosphere, and then discharging its waste back into its host with already catastrophic consequences. The population increase from 1 to 8 billion and a 100-fold expansion of real GDP growth in just 2 centuries on a finite planet with finite resources has thus propelled modern techno-industrial society into a state of advanced overshoot. We are consuming and polluting the biophysical basis of our own existence. Climate and biosphere collapse are the most visible symptoms of overshoot, though overpopulation and overconsumption per capita is also core. But mainstream's solutions will actually accelerate climate disruption and worsen overshoot, not mitigate it. Humanity is exhibiting the characteristic dynamics of a one-off population boom-bust cycle. The controllers are acutely aware of this, thus why they are doing all that they are doing. The question is, why are the vast majority actively or passively participating in their own demise? I never wanted this post for the last 20 plus years, but it is the one I was given, and I will continue to do my best until I can't. Does the horizon look dark? Yes. Are the odds against us? Yes. Should we tuck tail and run? Absolutely not. Manning our individual posts, especially at this late hour, is our absolute obligation to the whole, to the Creator. There is no greater form of solace. Stand your ground. Don't yield. Know that the same cancer of power is manipulating everything from conflicts to climate engineering and completely controlling the narrative on both, along with everything in between, while rolling out a constant stream of distract and divide scripted political theater. Take the time to actually investigate, to objectively investigate. Don't blindly believe me or anything that I report in this broadcast, or certainly anything Matrix Media spews out. Search the facts for yourself from independent and objective sources. Believe what you see, not what you're told to believe. Exposing and halting climate engineering operations is the first and most important leap we can collectively make in the right direction at this late hour. Sharing credible data from a credible source is key. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help. Please make your voice heard. Make every single day count. Time is not on our side. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.